Picture this: a grand medieval hall, alive with laughter and the rich scent of roasted game, honey-glazed pastries, and spiced wine. The tables groan under the weight of feasts fit for kings, yet every bite could be a gamble with death. Behind the glittering tapestries and clinking goblets, a silent war raged between those who crafted these lavish meals and those who laced them with poison. This wasn't just about food, it was a battle of survival, where trust was as rare as gold and every dish could hide a deadly secret. At the heart of every royal court, two figures held power over life and death: the castle cook, whose skill could win favor or provoke envy, and the poison master, whose knowledge of herbs and potions could topple empires. Their rivalry wasn't just personal, it shaped history, deciding who rose to power and who met a gruesome end at the banquet table. Think of the cook, laboring over steaming cauldrons, knowing their reputation and their life depended on pleasing the king's palate. Now imagine the poison master, lurking in the shadows, turning the same ingredients into instruments of betrayal. It was a dance of deception, where a pinch of the wrong spice could change the fate of nations. Why did this rivalry flourish? Because in a world where power was won and lost at the dinner table, food was more than sustenance, it was a weapon. Kings and queens surrounded themselves with tasters, yet even the most cautious rulers fell victim to plots simmering in their own kitchens. From whispered rumors of poisoned wine to the shocking downfall of entire dynasties, this hidden conflict reveals the darker side of medieval life. So pull up a chair, metaphorically, of course, and prepare to uncover the secrets of the castle cooks and poison masters. Their story is one of ingenuity, paranoia, and the lengths people would go to secure power or survive it. To hold the title of castle cook was to walk a razor's edge between honor and peril. These masters of the hearth didn't just prepare meals, they orchestrated edible diplomacy, where every course could strengthen alliances or spark rebellions. Picture the immense pressure as they selected each ingredient, knowing a spoiled barrel of fish or a tainted haunch of venison might be mistaken for sabotage. Their kitchens became laboratories of trust, where apprentices swore blood oaths never to reveal the secret blends of spices that made their lord's table legendary. Some cooks even developed ingenious methods to prove their loyalty, like tasting random portions before servants carried dishes to the high table, a living guarantee against poison. The most skilled cooks became celebrities of their age, their names recorded in household roles alongside knights and ministers. Take Guillaume Tile, known as Taillevant, who rose from kitchen boy to chief cook for King Charles V of France. His cookbook La Viandière wasn't just recipes, it was a survival manual for courtly life, teaching how to present peacock as if it were still alive or disguise humble ingredients as extravagant delicacies. Such culinary deception wasn't mere vanity. In times of siege or poor harvest, a cook's ability to maintain the illusion of abundance kept up morale and prevented panic. Yet even the most celebrated cook lived with constant suspicion. Royal kitchens often employed multiple tasters at different stages from the pantry to the platter, creating chains of accountability. Some lords went further, keeping separate teams of cooks who prepared identical meals in isolated kitchens, with only one version randomly selected for serving. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine kneading dough while knowing your fingerprints in the flour might someday be examined for treason. This climate of fear bred extraordinary innovation, like developing complex flavor profiles that would instantly reveal tampering, or creating serving rituals where dishes were unveiled in the ruler's presence to prevent, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. The cook's greatest weapon against poison masters wasn't just vigilance, but the intimate knowledge of their patrons' preferences. A sudden change in appetite, perhaps the king avoiding his favorite spiced wine, could signal attempted poisoning before the first symptom appeared. Some accounts suggest clever cooks planted false dietary quirks in their lords, like pretending a dislike for saffron, making it easier to spot contaminated dishes. Their role blurred the lines between chef, bodyguard, and spy, always watching, always tasting, turning the simple act of cooking into high-stakes theater where every meal might be their last performance. What's often overlooked is how these culinary guardians shaped history beyond the kitchen. When Duke Philip the Good of Burgundy wanted to humiliate the English at a peace banquet, his cooks served roast peacock dressed in its feathers, but with the English coat of arms painted on the bird's breast, destined to be carved apart. Food could convey messages no diplomat would dare speak aloud. The cook's art wasn't merely survival, it was power, psychology, and propaganda simmering in the same pot. Their rivalry with poison masters wasn't just about life and death, but who truly controlled the narrative written in steam rising from golden platters. While castle cooks fought to maintain trust through transparency, poison masters thrived in the art of deception. Their expertise lay not just in toxicity, but in making death indistinguishable from natural misfortune. A skilled poisoner knew how to mimic food spoilage, perhaps slipping arsenic into a slightly off-tasting almond cream, so the victim's convulsions would be blamed on rotten ingredients rather than foul play. Some compounds were chosen for their delayed effects, allowing the perpetrator to be miles away when the victim collapsed days later. The infamous aqua tofana, a colorless arsenic solution, could be added to holy water bottles, turning a pious sip into a death sentence. These shadowy figures often hid in plain sight. Many poison masters held respectable positions as court physicians or herbalists, their vast knowledge of healing plants giving them equal understanding of lethal doses. The line between medicine and murder blurred. What cured a headache in small amounts could stop a heart when concentrated. Some rulers kept poison experts on retainer, not for assassination, but as defensive strategists. These advisors would train tasters to recognize the metallic tang of mercury or the numbing sensation of hemlock. Yet the same knowledge that protected kings could topple them when Pope Alexander VI hosted a banquet. His own poison master son, Cesare Borgia, allegedly used the family's stash of cantarella powder to eliminate troublesome cardinals. The techniques of these covert chemists were as varied as their motives. Some favored contact poisons applied to utensils rather than food. A knife blade brushed with aconite could transfer enough toxin through a single cut of meat. Others exploited seasonal vulnerabilities. Winter feasts might feature wine laced with sweetened lead acetate, its fruity flavor masking the metal's slow paralysis. The most cunning operators used psychological warfare, letting rumors of their skills circulate until victims succumbed to panic-induced symptoms before any physical poison took effect. What made this rivalry with castle cooks so volatile was their shared language of ingredients. Both manipulated the same spices, wines, and preserves, one to delight, the other to destroy. A cook's signature saffron rice became dangerous territory when a poisoner realized the spice's bold color could mask flecks of crushed yew berries. Some poison masters reportedly bribed kitchen staff to learn a lord's favorite dishes, then tailored toxins to complement those flavors. The bitter aftertaste of strychnine easily drowned in heavily spiced Hippocrates wine. This culinary cat and mouse game elevated both professions into an arms race of wits, where a cook's ability to spot irregularities in texture or aroma could mean the difference between a standing ovation and a funeral procession. Records from the Venetian state archives reveal how seriously courts took this threat. One procurement list from 1582 details payments for 12 white peacocks not for eating, but as living poison detectors. The birds' extreme sensitivity to toxins made them feathered alarms. If they pecked at spilled wine and staggered, the cupbearer would discreetly replace the goblet. Such measures show how poison masters didn't just kill individuals, they reshaped entire cultures of dining. The Venetian obsession with glassware wasn't just aesthetic. Transparent vessels made tampering visible, while the invention of the Narsala fork allowed nobles to spear food without touching potentially poisoned surfaces. Perhaps the most chilling legacy of these covert operators was their ability to weaponize trust itself. When the Medici family's private physician turned poisoner, he exploited his patient's faith in his healing hands. This betrayal created paranoia that rippled through royal courts soon. No advisor's suggestion of tonic wine was taken at face value. The poison master's true power wasn't in the vial, but in the psychological siege that made every meal feel like Russian roulette. Kings who survived multiple attempts developed elaborate food rituals, like Frederick the Great of Prussia insisting his potatoes be prepared only by an illiterate farmer's wife, reasoning that someone who couldn't read poison recipes posed less danger. This shadow war between kitchen and apothecary reached its peak during royal weddings, where competing factions might use the feast as their battlefield. The 1524 marriage banquet of Duke Alessandro de' Medici featured an entire anti-poison service dishes prepared with detoxifying ingredients like crushed emeralds, believed to neutralize toxins, served alongside the main courses. Yet, ironically, Alessandro would later die by assassination, proving that for every defensive innovation, poison masters devised 3 countermeasures. Their legacy endures in modern food safety protocols. The very concept of tamper-evident packaging owes its existence to these medieval masters of deception. Long before medieval feasts became battlegrounds, the seeds of this deadly rivalry were sown in antiquity. The Roman Emperor Claudius allegedly fell victim to poisoned mushrooms served by his own wife Agrippina, while ancient Sanskrit texts detail royal kitchens employing rasa vidya, experts alchemists who could transform food into medicine or weapons. But it was Byzantium that turned culinary suspicion into statecraft. Emperor Constantine VII's 10th century manual on court ceremonies included meticulous rules for food preparation, with tasters sampling each dish from identical golden spoons to eliminate favoritism. The Islamic world refined these practices further. In 9th century Baghdad, Caliph al-Muqtadir's kitchens operated like fortresses, with sealed spice jars and cooks who wore gloves to prevent skin contact poisons. Physicians like al-Razi wrote entire treatises on detecting toxins in food, noting how silver spoons could blacken when exposed to certain compounds. These innovations traveled west via Crusaders and Moorish Spain, reaching European courts just as noble families began consolidating power through strategic marriages and strategic eliminations. By the 1200s, the rivalry had crystallized into an institutional arms race. King John of England's household roles show payments to both a magister coquus and a beneficiarius, literally a master cook and a poison expert, their salaries carefully balanced to prevent either from being bought off. The infamous assize of bread laws, originally meant to prevent food fraud, were adapted to prosecute poisoners when bakers added toxic whitening agents to flour. Feasts became the ultimate proving ground. At a 1486 banquet celebrating the marriage of Maximilian of Austria and Mary of Burgundy, guests marveled at an edible castle centerpiece, but few noticed the army of food testers working in shifts beneath the tables. Each pastry tower and gilded meat pie was sampled by 3 separate tasters using a system borrowed from Venetian banks, one to taste, one to witness, and one to record reactions in a ledger. The rivalry's peak came with the Renaissance, when science gave both sides new tools. Cooks adopted the Arab technique of sugar sculpting not just for show, but because hardened sugar shells made tampering visible. Poison masters retaliated with innovations like inheritance powder, odorless, tasteless arsenic trioxide that could be measured grain by grain using the newly invented pocket balance scale. This technological escalation turned dining halls into silent laboratories, where every clink of a goblet might signal another move in history's most deliciously dangerous game. One of the most chilling examples unfolded in 1485, when the Duke of Urbino suddenly clutched his throat during a feast celebrating his daughter's engagement. Witnesses described how his face turned violet as he collapsed onto a platter of gilded swan meat, the same dish his personal cook had proudly presented moments earlier. Investigations revealed the cook had been blackmailed. The Duke's rival held the man's family hostage, forcing him to lace the sauce with crushed belladonna berries. What made this case so explosive was the cook's suicide note, confessing under duress but also implicating the court's official poison tester, who had mysteriously skipped sampling that particular course. The scandal birthed a gruesome new tradition. From that day forward, Urbino's cooks were required to swallow 3 bites of every dish while maintaining eye contact with the Duke before serving. Equally dramatic was the downfall of Marguerite de Brescia, a French noblewoman whose sweet tooth became her undoing. Her personal poison master, a woman secretly in love with Marguerite's husband, had spent years gradually increasing the arsenic in her marzipan. The slow poisoning mimicked wasting disease until a visiting physician noticed the telltale white lines on Marguerite's fingernails. In a shocking twist, the family cook uncovered the crime by testing kitchen scraps on stray dogs. This case revolutionized food safety. French aristocracy began employing paired tasters, one for sweet foods, one for savory, to prevent any single poison expert from controlling all testing. Perhaps the most audacious poisoning unfolded at the 1498 wedding feast of Lucrezia Borgia's third husband. Contemporary accounts describe how guests watched in horror as the groom's cupbearer dropped dead after sampling the ceremonial wine, only for Lucrezia to calmly drink from the same goblet without effect. The truth, the cup's intricate stem had been engineered to release poison when tilted, left the taster's habit, but not right Lucrezia's grip. This brazen stunt backfired spectacularly when the family's head cook publicly demonstrated the mechanism using a condemned prisoner, shifting blame from the Borgias to an overzealous poison master who'd allegedly acted alone. The cook's reward, a dukedom for his nephew, proof that in this deadly game, loyalty could be as lucrative as treachery. These cases expose the psychological warfare beneath the surface. After the Urbino scandal, many cooks began wearing distinctive gloves during preparation, not for hygiene, but to visibly prove they weren't palming poison. Some lords instituted ingredient transparency, laws requiring markets to document every spice seller who supplied the castle. The Marguerite case spawned a macabre fashion for portrait rings among nobility, with tiny compartments holding antidotes to known poisons. Each high-profile death didn't just claim a victim, it reshaped dining customs, turning every banquet into a performative act of mutual suspicion where the clatter of knives against plates sounded like dueling swords. The Borgia wedding incident reveals the rivalry's cruelest irony. Often, neither cook nor poison master truly controlled the outcome. Historical records show at least 12 cases where ambitious nobles staged poisonings to eliminate both, framing the cook to discredit their culinary network while sacrificing the poison master as proof of justice. In 1517, the Duke of Ferrara's kitchen staff uncovered such a plot when they noticed identical mince pies sent to both the court physician and head chef. This double-crossing birthed an uneasy alliance between the two professions. Some kitchens began keeping shared ledgers where poison experts would certify ingredient safety in exchange for cooks vouching for their loyalty. What makes these stories endure isn't just their shock value, but how they expose the fragile theater of courtly power. When the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V hosted a state dinner in 1530, observers noted he ate only from communal platters after watching others partake, yet his personal taster still sampled each dish twice. Such paranoid contradictions became the norm. Rulers needed to project confidence while practicing vigilance, trusting no single system entirely, the lasting legacy. Modern diplomatic protocols still echo these ancient fears, from rotating food tasters at state functions to the strict sequencing of toasts ensuring no glass sits unattended. The knives may be salad forks now, but the game remains the same. In the flickering torchlight of medieval kitchens, the tools of cooks and poison masters might have looked eerily similar: mortars grinding powders, delicate scales measuring grains, bundles of dried herbs hanging from rafters. But their intentions couldn't have been more different. A cook's prized saffron, worth its weight in gold, lent dishes a radiant hue and earthy depth, while a poison master's stash of crushed yew berries could mimic that same golden color while delivering a paralyzing blow. Even common ingredients became double agents. Bitter almonds, when expertly prepared, added a marzipan sweetness to desserts, but a handful of improperly processed kernels released enough cyanide to silence a banquet hall. The most sought-after spices weren't just status symbols, they were shields. Cinnamon's bold aroma could mask the metallic tang of arsenic, while cloves' numbing effect made them perfect for both toothache remedies and disguising the tingling warning of hemlock. Cooks developed an almost mystical knowledge of their ingredients, learning to spot inconsistencies. A batch of nutmeg that smelled too sweet might be laced with toxic calamus root, while wine that left an unusual film on glass could signal lead contamination. Some kitchens kept live geese tethered near pantries, believing the birds would honk wildly if they sensed poison, a feathery alarm system with a better track record than many human tasters. Poison masters, meanwhile, turned botany into a deadly science. They prized plants like aconite, nicknamed Queen of Poisons, for its ability to mimic heart failure, or innocuous-seeming water hemlock, whose roots resembled edible parsnips but caused violent seizures. The real artistry lay in timing. Some toxins took days to act, allowing the perpetrator to be far from suspicion when symptoms struck. Venetian archives describe a case where a diplomat's cook noticed his lord's favorite figs arrived suspiciously soft. Investigation revealed they'd been injected with peach pit extract using a syringe disguised as a quill. This arms race birthed bizarre innovations. Wealthy households commissioned poison-proof utensils, spoons made from unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, believed to sweat in the presence of toxins, or goblets of obsidian glass that allegedly cracked if filled with tainted wine. Cooks began serving dishes with dramatic flourishes, flambeing meat table-side not just for spectacle, but to prove the brandy hadn't been swapped with poisoned spirits. The most paranoid lords required separate teams to handle raw ingredients, with one group washing vegetables, another chopping, and a third cooking, ensuring no single person controlled the entire process. Perhaps the greatest irony was how this rivalry advanced both sciences. poison masters' need for undetectable toxins spurred early chemistry, leading to discoveries like distillation techniques later used in perfume making. Cooks, forced to understand food at a molecular level, pioneered preservation methods that would shape modern cuisine. Their shared obsession with purity gave us the first food safety laws, like 14th century England's decree that all meat must be sold in daylight so customers could spot discoloration. Even today, the ghost of this battle lingers in restaurant kitchens where tasting spoons are never reused, and in the universal shudder at the phrase, "just a pinch of something special." The life of a royal food taster was a paradox, simultaneously honored and expendable, trusted yet doomed by their very purpose. These human shields dined like kings moments before their lords, savoring every morsel with the knowledge that each bite might be their last. Records from the court of Henry VIII show tasters received wages triple that of common servants, along with fine clothing befitting their proximity to power, yet no amount of velvet trim could disguise the grim reality. Their job required more than a strong stomach. Tasters trained for years to recognize subtle warning signs: a bitter aftertaste in wine, an unusual numbness after chewing meat, even changes in their own pulse that might hint at slow-acting toxins. Some developed almost supernatural sensory skills. A famed taster in the court of Alfonso V of Aragon could allegedly detect arsenic by the way it made silverware feel slippery against his teeth. Others relied on methodical systems, like the Medici family's taster, who kept a detailed logbook tracking which dishes caused even mild dizziness or sweating. The most valuable tasters weren't those who died quickly, but those who survived long enough to identify patterns, noticing, for instance, that only fish dishes served on Tuesdays seemed to induce headaches, suggesting a poisoner among the weekly seafood vendors. Yet poison masters adapted with chilling creativity. They began crafting two-stage toxins, harmless when first consumed, but lethal when combined with a second seemingly innocent ingredient served courses later. A taster might sample mushroom soup with no ill effects, unaware the real danger lay in the herbid butter served with the next dish. Other poisoners exploited human biology, using compounds that took hours to act, long after the taster's watch had ended. The Borgias allegedly favored cantarella, a toxin that mimicked sudden illness only after the victim had retired for the evening, leaving the taster blameless and the murderer undetected. Cook teams fought back with equally ingenious tactics. Some kitchens implemented chain tasting, where multiple servants sampled portions from the same dish at staggered intervals, creating a living timeline of symptoms. Others developed sacrificial dishes, decoys like heavily spiced meat pies that poisoners might target, allowing the true meal to go untouched. Venetian archives describe a cook who saved his duke by serving chilled melon first. When the taster's lips turned blue, the cook immediately cancelled the remaining courses, having deduced the poison required warmth to activate. The psychological toll on tasters was unimaginable. Many developed ritualistic behaviors, chewing each bite exactly 7 times, or refusing to eat unless standing on a particular floor tile believed to bring luck. Some courts employed twins as tasters, gambling that shared biology might make one sibling react similarly to the other. In Moscow's Kremlin, tasters reportedly wore silk gloves at all meals, not for etiquette but to check for telltale sweat that might reveal contact poisons seeping through their skin. This deadly profession left an unexpected legacy in modern medicine. The detailed symptom journals kept by tasters became early toxicology records, helping physicians distinguish between foodborne illness and deliberate poisoning. Their sacrifices also shaped dining etiquette. The tradition of serving from the left and removing plates from the right arose to prevent servants from secretly swapping utensils mid-meal. Even today, the faint shadow of their vigilance lingers in restaurant kitchens where chefs taste dishes before service, or in the universal hesitation before being the first to dip into a communal dish. A medieval taster would nod in grim recognition. Some instincts, it seems, are harder to poison than others. The dining hall wasn't just a place for nourishment, it was a theater of terror where whispers carried more weight than daggers. Imagine sitting at a feast where every bite came with paralyzing uncertainty, where a noble might push away a perfectly safe dish just because their rival had complimented its aroma. This psychological warfare turned meals into mind games, with cooks and poison masters as puppeteers pulling invisible strings. A single rumor could destroy careers overnight. When King Louis XI of France once frowned at his soup, the entire kitchen staff was jailed without evidence, proof that perception often outweighed reality. Poison masters mastered this shadow play brilliantly. Some would leave cryptic notes near spice barrels or accidentally drop suspicious vials where servants might find them. The goal wasn't always murder. Sometimes just the specter of poison could achieve their aims. In 1512, a Milanese duke avoided war by hosting a banquet where his personal poison tester dramatically collapsed after sampling wine, later revealed to contain nothing but a harmless sleeping draught. The terrified guest surrendered without a fight, believing resistance meant certain death. Cooks retaliated with theatrical displays of transparency. Some instituted procession serving, where dishes traveled from kitchen to table through a gauntlet of witnesses, each person touching the platter to share accountability. Others engraved their names on serving knives not as vanity, but as a guarantee they'd stake their lives on every slice. The most ingenious cooks turned suspicion into spectacle, like those who prepared live fish in dining halls so nobles could witness the creature's swimming moments before cooking, eliminating fears of pre-poisoned meat. This psychological arms race reshaped court hierarchies. Clever rulers exploited the tension by appointing rival cooks to oversee different courses, ensuring no single chef controlled an entire meal. The infamous bread of lies tradition saw lords occasionally swap plates with servants, not from kindness, but to make poisoners hesitate when they couldn't predict the target. Some nobles carried personal tasting kits with ivory picks to sample food discreetly, while others cultivated public reputations for eccentric eating habits to mask their paranoia. The fear even birthed bizarre culinary trends. When word spread that Pope Clement VII avoided poison by eating only eggs laid in his presence, Italian nobles suddenly demanded hen houses in their bedchambers. For 50 years, trustworthy chicken keepers became highly paid courtiers. Similarly, the rise of clear broths in 16th century France wasn't about taste. Transparent soups made contaminants easier to spot. What made this mental torment so effective was its self-perpetuating nature. Each prevented poisoning attempt validated the fear, fueling ever more elaborate precautions. A Spanish duke's household records show servants once spent 17 minutes ceremoniously passing a single plum between 12 tasters before serving, not because of real danger, but because the ritual itself became a political statement. In the end, the rivalry's true victory wasn't in bodies claimed, but in minds conquered. Long after the last medieval kitchen fire burned out, its legacy endured in the way we still hesitate before being the first to taste unfamiliar dishes, or why we instinctively watch our drinks at crowded bars. Centuries-old reflexes from when dining wasn't pleasure but survival. In the shadowy corners of royal courts, where whispered deals carried more weight than signed decrees, an even darker twist emerged in the cook-poison master rivalry, outright collaboration. These weren't just enemies locked in battle, they were sometimes co-conspirators trading secrets like recipes. Take the infamous case of the Duke of Milan's kitchen in 1491, where the head cook and court apothecary were discovered splitting payments from a rival family. Their scheme was diabolically simple. The cook would create dishes with subtle flavor imbalances, prompting the duke to request digestive tonics from the apothecary, tonics laced with slow-acting mercury. The two profited handsomely until a scullery maid noticed the apothecary's midnight visits to the spice cabinet. What drove these unlikely alliances? Often, it was the brutal pressure of court politics. A cook facing demotion might strike a deal to poison their successor's trial dish, while poison masters needed inside knowledge of royal menus to time their attacks. The Florentine archives reveal one poisoner's ledger listing bribes to a pastry chef for details on which desserts would be served at a Medici wedding, information that allowed him to dose individual cream puffs meant for specific guests. These partnerships thrived on mutual desperation. Neither party could expose the other without sealing their own fate. The consequences of such collusion reverberated far beyond the kitchen. In 1543, the sudden death of a Hungarian prince was traced to his cook's secret meetings with a traveling herbalist. Investigators found coded notes suggesting the cook had traded the prince's food preferences for a promise of sanctuary abroad, proof that culinary knowledge could be as deadly as any toxin. This case sparked a chilling trend among European nobility. Many began employing deaf-mute cooks, believing their inability to speak made them less susceptible to poisoners' bribes. Yet the most audacious collaborations were those that manipulated entire dynasties. The scandal surrounding King James III of Scotland's death in 1488 hints at a kitchen physician plot to steer succession. Records show his personal chef suddenly acquired land after the king's mysterious illness, a chef who happened to be childhood friends with the royal poison tester. The timing raised eyebrows when both men vanished weeks later, leaving behind a pantry stocked with suspiciously labeled jars of preserved herbs. These shadow pacts forced rulers to innovate their defenses. Some instituted rotating kitchen staff so no cook could memorize royal tastes thoroughly enough to betray them. Others, like Queen Elizabeth I, kept their poison masters and cooks in constant competition, publicly pitting them against each other in monthly tasting trials, where each had to detect the other's tampering attempts. The psychological toll was immense. One Venetian cook's diary describes lying awake, wondering if the physician praising his almond tarts was genuinely impressed or casing the kitchen for weaknesses. What's rarely acknowledged is how these uneasy alliances advanced culinary science. The need to hide poison in food led to discoveries about flavor-masking techniques later used to make medicines palatable. Collaborating poison masters taught cooks how certain proteins could neutralize toxins, leading to dishes like the still popular Venetian antidote fish, where seafood is marinated in milk to bind potential heavy metals. Even modern food safety protocols owe debts to these dark partnerships. The practice of keeping ingredient samples for 7 days originated from courts requiring evidence jars of every meal component in case of later investigation. The moral gray areas were vast. Was a cook who poisoned a tyrant's meal a villain or a hero? Should a poison master who turned informant be rewarded or executed? These questions haunted courts, where the line between assassin and freedom fighter often depended on who told the story. After all, the same kitchen knife that carved celebratory roasts could also slice the throat of justice, and in this world, both outcomes might be ordered from the same royal menu. The Church's thunderous condemnation of poisoning echoed through every cathedral and confession booth, branding it not just a crime but a mortal sin against God's will. Yet behind stained glass windows and cloistered halls, some clergymen mastered the very art they publicly damned. Take the notorious case of Archbishop Giovanni Visconti of Milan. who in 1346 allegedly dispatched 3 political rivals with communion wine laced with arsenic, a sacrilege that sent shockwaves through Christendom. This hypocrisy wasn't lost on medieval congregations. When priests warned poisoners would burn in hell's eternal fires, many nobles secretly wondered if the sermon came from first-hand experience. For cooks, the church's stance became an unexpected blessing. A chef who attended daily mass and wore a crucifix prominently could deflect suspicion more effectively than any tasting ritual. Records from Burgundy show pious cooks were often promoted over more skilled but less devout rivals, their faith treated as culinary armor. Some kitchens even developed blessed preparation rituals, crossing themselves before seasoning, or hanging holy water sprinklers near stew pots, performances of purity that doubled as career insurance. The most cunning cooks turned piety into profit, like one in Avignon who sold saint-touched spoons guaranteed to detect poison, conveniently blessed by his uncle in the Papal Guard. Yet the clergy's involvement ran deeper than a few bad apples. Monastic gardens cultivated the very herbs poison masters coveted: belladonna for eye drops, hemlock for pain relief, their medicinal knowledge easily weaponized. The Abbey of Monte Cassino became infamous when investigators found its infirmary ledgers listing doses that could cure a man or clear a path to the throne. Even the Vatican maintained discreet poison experts. Pope Alexander VI's personal physician kept a library of toxicology texts later burned by his successor in a very public and very staged display of reform. This spiritual schism reshaped the rivalry in unexpected ways. Poison masters developed codes mimicking religious symbols. A cross scratched on an apple might signal safety, while a fish drawn in wine dregs could warn of danger. Cooks retaliated by embedding actual scripture into their craft. One English royal kitchen required Bible verses be etched onto all cutting boards, turning food prep into performative worship. The church's obsession with poisoning even birthed new saints, like Saint Benedict, whose legend claimed he blessed a poisoned loaf only for ravens to carry it away, making him patron of both monks and paranoid diners. Perhaps the most lasting impact was on medieval justice. While secular courts relied on trial by combat to settle poisoning accusations, the church insisted on investigation, demanding evidence like unusual powders or sudden wealth shifts. This shift birthed early forensic techniques. Inquisitors would compare suspect powders to monastic herbarium samples, or test toxins on animals while reciting prayers to see if divine intervention spared them. The irony: these holy experiments advanced toxicology more than any poison master's secret notes. By the 1400s, the battle lines had blurred beyond recognition. A cook might genuflect before roasting a peacock while secretly knowing its gilded feathers hid poison-absorbing gems. A bishop could denounce venomous plots from the pulpit while his cellar master aged wine in lead-lined casks that slowly addled rivals' minds. In this world where scripture and subterfuge danced hand in hand, the truest sin wasn't poison, it was getting caught. Behind castle walls and herb-scented kitchens, women moved through the shadows of this deadly rivalry with knives and vials hidden in their skirts. While chroniclers obsessed over kings and their male advisors, the real power often lay in the hands of women's society dismissed as mere cooks, healers, or ladies-in-waiting. Take the legendary kitchen witches of Bavaria, wise women whose mastery of herbs made them indispensable to noble households. A pinch of thyme could cure a lord's indigestion, while a carefully measured drop of monkshood in the same stew might end his reign. These women walked a razor's edge, valued for their knowledge yet distrusted for it, their aprons' pockets holding both remedies and ruin. The case of Elena of Aquitaine's personal cook, known only as Mathilda in court roles, reveals how female culinary artists wielded influence. When Elena was imprisoned by her husband Henry II, Mathilda continued sending her mistress spiced wine and marzipan discreetly laced with saffron to combat depression. This quiet defiance wasn't just loyalty, it was culinary warfare. Years later, when Elena regained power, Mathilda's kitchen became the heart of political intelligence, her network of scullery maids and market women gathering whispers between chopping onions and plucking geese. Noblewomen, meanwhile, turned domestic spaces into battlegrounds. The infamous Lucrezia Borgia may have dominated poison lore, but lesser-known figures like Isabella de Medici used more subtle tactics. Her secret weapon, a perfume atomizer that could mist poisoned lavender water over a rival's gloves during seemingly innocent greetings. Women's traditional roles provided perfect cover. Who would suspect the demure wife embroidering by the fire when her husband collapsed after supper? The Venetian Council of Ten's archives contains 17 documented cases of noblewomen exchanging recipes through coded embroidery patterns, their needlework hiding assassination plans as intricate as the floral motifs. Female poison masters operated with chilling efficiency precisely because society refused to see them as threats. In 1503, a Parisian midwife named Guillemette duped an entire court by disguising arsenic as a fertility tonic. Her clientele included desperate wives and ambitious mistresses, all trusting the kindly auntie who visited birthing chambers with her innocent-looking satchel. Only when 3 prominent noblemen died after their wives conceived did investigators uncover her ledger, a coded list matching doses to payment in pearls and land deeds. The herbalist's garden became a double-edged sanctuary. Women like Hildegard of Bingen wrote revered medicinal texts while secretly documenting which healing plants became lethal in moonlight. At Malbork Castle in Prussia, the head cook's daughter famously grew valerian near the kitchen door, its calming scent masking the bitter odor of nightshade tinctures she added to the Teutonic Knight's beer. These women exploited the medieval belief that female hands were purer for food preparation, turning prejudice into protection. A kitchen maid could stir a pot with one hand while dropping belladonna berries from her sleeve with the other, all under the approving gaze of lords who thought women too simple for intrigue. Their legacy lingers in unexpected places. The tradition of women sampling food before serving it to children originated not from maternal care, but from noble households requiring nurses to taste nursery meals first. Even today's chef's kiss gesture traces back to Venetian poison testers who blew on their fingertips after dipping them in soup, a signal the dish was safe, though many women used the same gesture to discreetly flick antidote powders into cups. These hidden histories remind us that while men dominated the official records, women wrote their own stories in steam rising from poisoned chalices and healing broths alike, one deliberate sip at a time. Alchemy's bubbling flasks and cryptic symbols weren't just the domain of bearded hermits in dusty towers. They were the hidden engines driving both castle kitchens and assassination plots. Picture a medieval laboratory where copper stills used to distill rosewater for desserts stood shoulder to shoulder with glass retorts brewing mercury-laced tinctures. This paradoxical space birthed innovations that could dazzle a banquet hall or empty a throne room, depending on who held the recipe book. When cooks discovered sugar's preservative powers through alchemical experiments, they could suddenly stockpile fruits for winter feasts, but the same process taught poison masters how to concentrate nightshade extracts into lethal syrups undetectable by taste or scent. The shared language of alchemy created a dangerous intimacy between these rivals. Both professions relied on the same foundational texts, like the Mappi Clavicula, which contained instructions for gilding pastries alongside formulas for corrosive aqua regia. A cook perfecting gold leaf for a celebratory pie might accidentally teach a poison master how to plate arsenic onto silverware. Even the tools blurred boundaries. The delicate balances used to measure saffron could also portion out fatal doses of white lead, while cheesecloth filters that clarified broths were equally effective at removing telltale sediment from poisoned wine. Some of history's most pivotal culinary breakthroughs emerged from this shadowy crossover. The technique of sous vide, often considered modern, has roots in 14th century alchemical practices where cooks sealed meats in pig bladders to slow cook in warm ash, a method originally developed to test whether heat altered poison potency. Fermentation studies intended to improve beer yielded an unexpected bonus. Brewers noticed that yeast cultures died when exposed to certain toxins, leading to the first biological poison detectors. Kings began employing beer tasters, whose sole job was monitoring vats for sudden die-offs that might indicate sabotage. The rivalry reached its peak when alchemical symbolism infiltrated food presentation itself. A peacock served with gilded claws wasn't just ostentatious. The gold foil signaled the dish had been tested for heavy metals, since authentic gold leaf won't adhere to tainted flesh. Subtle cues like spiraled lemon peels or precisely arranged herb sprigs became coded messages. Rosemary pointing north might mean safe for the king, while thyme scattered eastward could warn of tampering. Poison masters retaliated by developing toxins that mimicked alchemical transformations, like the infamous dragon's blood elixir that turned clear in red wine but cloudy in poisoned variants, a trick that backfired when clever cooks started adding harmless hibiscus to mimic the effect. This scientific arms race left fingerprints across Europe's grandest dining halls. The Vatican's Sala del Nos features frescoes of alchemists at work beside banquet scenes, not as decoration, but as a warning that every delicacy passed through the crucible of suspicion. In Prague Castle, Rudolf II's private kitchen had a hidden compartment beneath the hearth where cooks and poison masters could collaborate or conspire away from prying eyes. The most enduring legacy, though, lies in how these experiments shaped modern science. The same copper alembics that produced almond-flavored liquors for desserts later evolved into laboratory stills, while poison masters' meticulous notes on dosage and reaction times became foundational texts for pharmacology. What began as a feud over feasts ultimately stirred the pot of human progress, though whether that progress leaned toward nourishment or necrosis depended entirely on whose hand held the spoon. Among these culinary guardians, few names shine as brightly as that of Lorenzo da Cremona, a 15th century cook whose quick thinking became the stuff of legend. Serving the notoriously paranoid Duke of Ferrara, Lorenzo noticed his master's favorite white wine developed an odd opalescence when poured from a new cask. Where others might have dismissed it as sediment, Lorenzo's years of studying the behavior of ingredients told him otherwise arsenic, when dissolved, could create that exact milky swirl. His dramatic interception, snatching the goblet from the Duke's hand and dashing it against a silver platter to reveal blackened metal, earned him not just gratitude, but a coat of arms featuring a crossed spoon and wineglass. Then there was the cunning Margaret of Buda, head cook to Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, who turned mealtime into an impenetrable fortress. Suspecting poisoners were bribing tasters, she instituted the chain of tongues, a system where 12 servants each sampled one bite from a rotating sequence of dishes, ensuring no single person could predict which portion they'd taste. Her masterstroke came with the introduction of mirror plates, silver serving platters polished to such brilliance that any powder or droplet added after cooking would glint under candlelight. When a visiting diplomat's servant was caught nervously wiping a plate's edge, Margaret's system exposed the plot, and her reward was a decree that all royal kitchens in Hungary adopt her methods. The Florentine chef Giovanni del Spezzi took a different approach, weaponizing the poison master's own tricks against them. Knowing assassins often used bitter herbs to mask metallic toxins, he trained his palate to detect even the subtlest flavor deviations. His breakthrough came when he noticed a batch of the Duke's favorite pine nut tarts had a faint soapy aftertaste, a hallmark of hemlock oil. But instead of sounding the alarm, Giovanni played a dangerous game. He served the tarts with exaggerated praise, then watched as the court physician, the likely poisoner, abruptly remembered an urgent appointment. The Duke, tipped off by Giovanni's coded kitchen signals, had the physician's quarters searched that night, uncovering vials of matching tincture. The cook's reward, a monopoly on Florence's spice trade that made his family wealthy for generations. These victories weren't just personal triumphs, they reshaped dining customs across Europe. After a Saxon cook named Hermann der Feinschmecker saved his Margrave by insisting on tasting sauces with iron spoons which react with arsenic, noble households began demanding metal tastings for every course. The Feinschmecker method even inspired early food safety laws in German principalities, requiring communal tasting bowls at public feasts. Meanwhile, in Naples, cook Beatrice d'Aragana's habit of growing antidote herbs in kitchen gardens, from milk thistle to activated charcoal plants, spawned a trend so widespread that apothecaries complained of lost business. The most ingenious defenses often blended theater with practicality. At the court of Burgundy, head cook Jacques Legrand orchestrated the ballet of the platters, where serving dishes traveled along a human chain of alternating cooks and guards, each person locking eyes with the next as they passed the food. Any hesitation or averted gaze triggered immediate scrutiny. His piece de resistance, training parrots to squawk "pure, pure" when presented with untainted dishes, a trick that exploited the bird's natural aversion to toxic plants. The Duke was so delighted by this feathered alarm system that he commissioned a portrait of Jacques surrounded by his avian sentinels, a rare honor for a common-born cook. What made these figures extraordinary wasn't just their technical skill, but their psychological acumen. They understood that defeating poison required more than vigilance. It demanded an intimate grasp of human nature. When Elżbieta of Poland's personal cook noticed poisoners always targeted dishes requiring last-minute garnishes, she invented sealed serving, presenting meals under elaborately knotted parchment that had to be ceremonially cut at tableside. The crinkle of disturbed paper became as feared as a drawn sword. Others, like the Moorish cook Zara who served Spanish nobility, played on superstition by embedding witch marks into pastry crusts, intricate patterns that, if broken, signaled tampering. Her kitchen ledgers reveal purchases of egg whites not for cooking, but for creating invisible ink warnings beneath glazes. Their legacies endure in unexpected ways. Modern chefs still perform the flambé ritual not just for drama, but as a nod to when flaming alcohol proved liquor hadn't been swapped with poison, the tradition of serving whole fish with heads intact. A holdover from when rulers demanded to see clear eyes, a freshness test that doubled as toxin detection. Even the custom of clinking glasses stems from an era when wine was sloshed between cups to disprove fears of selective poisoning. These cooks didn't just save lives, they encoded survival into the very language of dining, turning every meal into a silent tribute to their forgotten brilliance. History remembers the most notorious poison masters not for their crimes, but for the chilling fact that they were never caught at all. Take the shadowy figure known only as La Cantarella, who terrorized Italian courts for nearly 2 decades. Disguised as a traveling spice merchant, they allegedly supplied tainted saffron to 6 different noble houses, each victim suffering identical symptoms of gradual paralysis before dying exactly 9 days after purchase. Investigators eventually traced the deaths to a single shipment from Alexandria, but the perpetrator vanished like smoke, leaving behind only a ledger entry describing the crimson powder that sings men to sleep. Then there was the case of the Phantom Physician of Prague, a healer whose patients included 5 rival barons competing for the Bohemian throne. Each baron received personalized tonics for their ailing constitutions, tonics that coincidentally contained just enough mercury to induce madness without immediate fatality. By the time the 5th baron began hallucinating spiders in his wine, the physician had already boarded a ship to Constantinople under a new identity. Court scribes noted the eerie precision of his work. All 5 victims survived, but their reputations lay in ruins, clearing the path for his true patron to seize power uncontested. Some poison masters turned their elusiveness into performance art. The Green Witch of Languedoc, never identified, never captured, left her calling card in the form of emerald-colored wax seals on wine barrels later found to contain distilled hellebore. Her legend grew so potent that French vineyards began branding their casks with red seals specifically to prove they weren't hers, birthing the tradition of wine certification that continues today. Even more brazen was the Spanish monk without a face, who infiltrated monasteries to poison communion wafers, exploiting the church's reluctance to admit such sacrilege could occur. His victims included 3 bishops and a wealthy patron who'd threatened to withdraw donations, all written off as divine strikes against the wicked until a terrified novice confessed to seeing a hooded figure tampering with the sacramental bread. The cleverest operators understood that the best poison leaves no evidence at all. In the Hungarian court of Matthias Corvinus, servants whispered of the silent steward, a high-ranking official who allegedly eliminated rivals by exploiting their habits rather than their meals. One general who always chewed rosemary for his breath died after the herb pots outside his chambers were replanted with toxic oleander. A bishop known for blessing himself with holy water collapsed after someone added arsenic to the font. Each death appeared accidental, the methods untraceable precisely because they didn't involve food. The silent steward's genius lay in recognizing that true poison mastery wasn't about toxins. It was about knowing your target better than they knew themselves. These faceless predators thrived by weaponizing the medieval world's greatest weakness, its record-keeping. Before standardized handwriting analysis or port records, a poisoner could simply alter their signature, swap a cloak, and become someone new. The Venetian archives contain a chilling marginal note about a Master of the 7 Seals, so named because he'd allegedly assumed 7 different professional identities across Europe: apothecary, scribe, tutor, and even a cook, before disappearing into the anonymity of history. His only slip came in 1489, when a perceptive notary noticed identical phrasing in poisoning contracts from Florence, Naples, and Vienna. By then, the trail was colder than the tombs of his victims. What made these figures so terrifying wasn't their lethality, but their ability to warp reality around them. After the Duke of Burgundy's taster survived a suspected poisoning in 1472, the would-be assassin simply spread rumors that the taster himself was the culprit. The resulting paranoia saw 5 innocent kitchen staff executed while the real poison master watched safely from the crowd. Others manipulated seasonal events. The infamous Harvest Reaper only struck during autumn feasts, knowing food spoilage would mask his crimes. Some even staged their own deaths, like the Saxon poisoner who faked drowning in the Elbe, only to resurface years later as a respected physician in Poland. Their legacies endure in ways we rarely notice. The modern concept of a paper trail originates from Venetian attempts to track spice purchases after poisonings. The tradition of physicians signing prescriptions in triplicate, a direct response to the phantom physician case, and every time you hesitate before accepting unsealed candy from strangers, you're channeling 8 centuries of collective paranoia, a quiet tribute to the poison masters who taught the world to watch its own cup. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the deadly chess game between castle cooks and poison masters began losing its feverish intensity. Not because fear vanished, no, suspicion still lingered like wood smoke in royal halls, but because the world itself had changed. Science, that relentless tide, washed away much of the mystery poison masters relied upon. Physicians could now detect arsenic in a corpse's fingernails, while alchemists developed reagents that turned vibrant colors when exposed to common toxins. What was once an invisible art now left fingerprints even a novice could trace. Governments tightened their grip too. Centralized power meant fewer rival nobles skulking in shadows, and more professionalized courts where sudden deaths attracted immediate scrutiny. The rise of standing armies and mercenary companies made brute force a safer bet than slow poison for ambitious plotters. Why risk a traceable toxin when a well-placed dagger or paid assassin could achieve the same end with less evidence? Even the church stepped in, declaring poison a coward's weapon, punishable by excommunication, a spiritual death sentence that gave many would-be poisoners pause. Kitchens transformed alongside courts. The cook's role shifted from bodyguard to artist, as Renaissance ideals celebrated culinary craftsmanship over life-saving vigilance. Banquets became theaters of edible marvels, sugar sculptures that wept honey tears, pies releasing live songbirds when sliced. A chef's worth was measured in gasps of delight, not sighs of relief. This wasn't just vanity, it reflected a world where rulers felt secure enough to prioritize spectacle over survival. The legendary Bartolomeo Scappi, chef to Pope Pius V, published cookbooks with intricate engravings of kitchen tools, but not a single recipe for antidote-laced broths. Poison masters adapted like shadows at dusk. Many pivoted to espionage, selling their knowledge of toxins to intelligence networks rather than individual plotters. Venice's notorious Council of 10 employed former poisoners as consultants, testing prisoners' food for tampering while teaching spies how to slip truth serums into wine. Others turned legit, like the Florentine poisoner who reinvented himself as a pioneer of forensic medicine, using his expertise to help courts identify suspicious deaths. The most cunning simply went corporate. Entire families in Padua and Lyon specialized in manufacturing safe poisons for governments, complete with contracts guaranteeing deniability. Yet the old fears never fully dissipated. Elizabethan England still saw paranoid nobles employing food tasters, and the Habsburgs kept their famed unicorn horn poison detectors well into the 1700s. The difference now, precautions were ceremonial rather than crucial, like wearing a sword to court long after dueling fell out of fashion. The rivalry's golden age had passed, but its echoes lingered in small gestures, a diplomat's hesitation before accepting foreign sweets, or the way kings still demanded their personal cooks oversee certain dishes. What ultimately faded wasn't the threat of poisoning, but its theatricality. The Renaissance brought bureaucracies that preferred paperwork over potions, and revolutions that toppled thrones openly rather than through whispered conspiracies. Poison became a tool for spies, not succession, a shift perfectly captured in the career of one anonymous poison master's ledger from 1584. His early entries detail elaborate plots against dukes, while later pages simply note payments for vermin removal at a French chateau. The deadly dance between cook and poisoner hadn't ended. It had simply moved from the banquet hall to the back alley, trading gilded platters for plain brown envelopes. Medieval scribes and storytellers couldn't resist the dramatic tension simmering between castle cooks and poison masters. It was the perfect recipe for intrigue. Take the Canterbury Tales, where Chaucer's Pardoner's Tale spins a grim fable about poisoned wine, warning that even the most lavish feast could hide betrayal. These weren't just entertaining yarns, they were cautionary tales whispered in the flickering light of hearths, teaching listeners to scrutinize every bite. Even saints' lives got in on the action. Legends like Saint Benedict's miraculously poisoned bread, snatched away by ravens, reinforced the idea that divine intervention was the only sure defense against culinary treachery. The stage, too, became a battleground for this rivalry. Shakespeare's Macbeth might feature witches and daggers, but its roots tap into the same paranoia. A king slain at a banquet, his murder disguised as hospitality. Earlier, in medieval morality plays, the character of Death often appeared as a cook or apothecary, stirring a cauldron while listing ingredients that doubled as euphemisms for poison. Audiences gasped when the villain in the Duke of Milan's Downfall dropped a vial into a goblet, but the real thrill came from recognizing the truth behind the fiction. This was how power actually changed hands in shadowed courts. Poetry sharpened the fear to a fine point. In the Carmina Burana, a 13th century drinking song suddenly twists into a warning. The wine is sweet, the host is kind / yet mark the foam that rides the tide. Even troubadours serenading noble ladies slipped in references to roses that wilt by morning, code for dishes that pleased the palate but stopped the heart. These verses weren't subtle, they were survival guides set to melody, teaching elites to distrust even the most gracious host. What's fascinating is how fiction blurred the lines between hero and villain. The Decameron features a cook who poisons a tyrannical bishop, framing it as divine justice, while Icelandic sagas celebrate shield maidens who slip herbs into mead to avenge their families. These stories gave people an outlet for their own anxieties. After all, if a humble kitchen worker could topple a corrupt lord, perhaps justice wasn't entirely dead. The poison master, meanwhile, became a shapeshifter, sometimes a devilish tempter, other times a tragic figure forced into evil by circumstance. Modern fantasy owes these tropes a staggering debt. George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire didn't invent the Red Wedding. It borrowed from real medieval massacres like the Feast of the Pheasant, where a duke's enemies allegedly poisoned an entire banquet's worth of guests. Video games like The Witcher let players brew potions with the same ambivalence as Renaissance apothecaries, while Dishonored turns poison into a tool of revolution. Even children's tales retain echoes. Snow White's apple, Sleeping Beauty's spindle disguised dangers offered with a smile. The rivalry's literary afterlife proves how deeply it scarred the collective imagination. Long after castles crumbled and courts modernized, we kept retelling these stories because they speak to a universal dread. That trust is fragile, and survival might hinge on noticing the wrong glint in a drink or the odd bitterness in a bite. Fiction didn't just preserve history, it turned the kitchen's knife-edge tension into a mirror, reflecting our own world's hidden betrayals back at us. Every time a detective in a novel sniffs a suspect's coffee or a movie spy refuses a dinner invitation, the ghosts of those medieval cooks and poison masters nod in grim recognition. The ghost of medieval kitchens still haunts our modern meals, though the stakes have shifted from survival to skepticism. Walk into any restaurant today, and you'll witness unconscious echoes of that ancient rivalry. Health inspection certificates displayed like royal decrees, chefs wearing gloves not just for hygiene but as visible symbols of accountability. Even the ritual of servers announcing dish ingredients with the precision of court tasters declaring a meal safe. Those gleaming glass deli counters, direct descendants of Venetian poison detectors' insistence on transparent serving vessels, the best before date stamped on every package. A secular version of the monk's blessing once thought to purify suspect foods. Dig deeper into food industry practices, and the parallels grow sharper. Modern supply chain tracking, with its barcodes and blockchain ledgers, mirrors medieval spice merchants' obsessive documentation of ingredient origins. When a salad recall hits the news due to contaminated lettuce, we're reliving the panic of a 14th century duke discovering his pepper shipment came from the same source as his rival's fatal last meal. Even the FDA's hazard analysis and critical control points system owes a debt to Margaret of Buda's chain of tongues method, identifying vulnerable points in food production and building checks around them. Yet the most telling legacy lies in our psychology. Scroll through restaurant reviews and you'll spot the same primal fears dressed in contemporary language. A one-star rant about mystery meat or a viral post accusing a chef of sketchy substitutions carries the same visceral distrust that once made kings demand live poultry be slaughtered before their eyes. The gluten-free movement, for all its medical validity, also taps into that ancient terror of invisible threats in daily bread. Modern food influencers photographing every meal component. They're performing the digital equivalent of a medieval taster's ritual, proving safety through exhaustive documentation. Some traditions have flipped, ironically. Where nobles once paid extra for unicorn horn utensils believed to detect poison, today's consumers snap up Himalayan salt blocks and activated charcoal smoothies touted as detoxifying. The Poison Master's arsenal of herbs has been rebranded as wellness supplements, with the same plants that once ended life's belladonna for eye drops, foxglove for heart medicine, now sold in diluted forms as holistic remedies. Even the concept of clean eating unconsciously replicates the medieval obsession with purity, swapping fear of arsenic for panic over pesticides. Perhaps nowhere is the legacy more poignant than in how we've commercialized paranoia. Medieval nobles paid alchemists to certify their wine. Today, we buy water filters that light up if detecting contaminants. The farm-to-table movement mirrors the Burgundian duke's insistence on knowing exactly which peasant grew their carrots. And when a celebrity chef tastes their own dish on camera before serving it, that's not just showmanship, it's a 7-century-old power move straight from Lorenzo da Cremona's playbook, proving trust through personal risk. This unbroken thread of caution reveals something profound about human nature. Our ancestors built entire civilizations around shared meals, yet never fully shook the fear that breaking bread might break trust. The modern world may have traded hemlock for high-fructose corn syrup as its boogeyman, but the essential question remains: how do we nourish ourselves without nourishing our own destruction? Every time you hesitate before a suspiciously discolored deli meat or check a yogurt lid for tampering, you're participating in a ritual older than forks, a quiet tribute to the cooks and poison masters who taught us that survival isn't just about what we eat, but how we watch over each other while we do. Beneath the crumbling stones of medieval kitchens and the dust-choked cellars of forgotten apothecaries, archaeologists have unearthed the silent witnesses to this deadly rivalry. A cracked ceramic jug from a Norman castle might seem ordinary until lab tests reveal traces of arsenic clinging to its interior, matching descriptions in a poisoner's confiscated diary. In Prague, a team excavating a royal pantry found walnut shells deliberately blackened with silver sulfide, a trick cooks use to detect tainted nuts by their reaction with common toxins. Even the layout of these spaces tells a story. Kitchens designed with witness corridors where servants could watch food preparation uninterrupted, and herb gardens partitioned by high walls to prevent cross-contamination between culinary and medicinal plants. The real smoking guns, though, lie in the mundane details. A 13th century cookbook from Montpellier contains what scholars once dismissed as superstitious doodles until someone noticed the symbols matched alchemical notations for toxic compounds. Between recipes for spiced venison, the scribe had drawn tiny skulls next to ingredients like Egyptian pepper, a known euphemism for hemlock. Elsewhere, excavation of a Venetian apothecary's waste pit uncovered vials with residue testing positive for atropine, alongside ledgers recording suspiciously large sales to a castle's head steward during a succession crisis. These fragments form a paper trail of paranoia, proving that what historians once called baseless court gossip was shockingly real. Human remains offer the most chilling confirmations. In 2012, researchers examining bones from a Burgundian noble family's crypt found mercury levels 60 times higher than normal in 3 generations of women, all married to the same powerful duke. The pattern was no accident. It pointed to a slow, systematic poisoning likely orchestrated by kitchen staff paid to keep the duke's bloodline controllable. Another breakthrough came with the re-examination of King Ferrante of Naples' skeleton in 2019. Contemporary accounts claimed he died of natural causes, but mass spectrometry revealed telltale gold particles in his jawbone, evidence of chronic poisoning by aurum pottabile, a gold-based toxin favored by Renaissance assassins. Perhaps the most poignant discovery emerged from a servant's grave near Oxford Castle, a young woman buried with a silver tasting spoon clenched in her skeletal hand. Soil analysis showed her stomach contents contained lethal doses of monkshood alongside lamb and rosemary, suggesting she'd intercepted a poisoned noble's meal at the cost of her own life. Her burial with the spoon, a tool above her station, hints she was honored posthumously as a martyr to culinary loyalty. These finds do more than corroborate written records. They resurrect the human dramas behind the artifacts. A broken mortar with ground yew berries still staining its pores isn't just an object, it's a snapshot of someone's desperation or vengeance, frozen in clay. Technology continues to peel back layers of deception. Multispectral imaging recently revealed erased marginalia in a 15th century physician's manual, including dosage tables for sleep-inducing tonics that match known poison symptoms. At Warwick Castle, archaeologists used residue chromatography on a rusted knife to identify walnut oil mixed with foxglove extract, proof of a cook's desperate attempt to mask a toxin's bitterness. Even dental calculus has become an archive. Tartar from a French queen's teeth preserved microscopic saffron strands laced with lead tetroxide, explaining her chronic illness in later life. These discoveries rewrite history in real time. When researchers found a skeleton beneath a Copenhagen palace with thallium still in its hair, a poison undetectable until the 19th century, it forced a re-evaluation of Scandinavian succession wars. Similarly, the unearthing of a Nuremberg apothecary's secret cellar in 2021 revealed jars labeled Innocenti Salvia, fool's sage, containing concentrated nicotine, solving the 4-century-old mystery of a bishop's sudden seizure after Mass. Each excavation confirms that the line between chef and chemist, between nourishment and necrosis, was far thinner than we ever imagined. The greatest revelation may be how ordinary these weapons were. Poison masters relied not on exotic imports, but everyday substances: lead sweetened wine, mercury-laced face powder, even ink pigments scraped from illuminated manuscripts and stirred into soup. Their true genius lay in making the familiar deadly, turning a castle's own luxuries against it. Meanwhile, cooks fought back with equally humble tools: vinegar to neutralize alkaloids, clay pots that absorbed heavy metals, even bread dough used as a primitive toxin sponge. This was a war waged with the contents of pantry and garden, proving that danger and salvation grew in the same soil. Archaeology hasn't just illuminated this rivalry, it's shown us how closely intertwined survival and destruction have always been. Fear had a way of sharpening the medieval mind, not just to avoid death, but to reinvent life at the dinner table. Take saffron, that crimson thread worth more than gold. Its original appeal wasn't just its exotic aroma or vibrant hue, but its ability to overpower the metallic tang of arsenic. Chefs who once sprinkled it cautiously to disguise tainted meats soon discovered its power to transform humble dishes into masterpieces. The same panic that made nobles demand saffron-tinted sauces as proof of safety also birthed risotto alla Milanese and Spanish paella, dishes that turned a defensive tactic into high art. Preservation methods leaped forward under the weight of suspicion. Smoking and salting meats, once rudimentary practices, became precise sciences when lords demanded foolproof ways to store food without cellar visits that might invite tampering. In Venice, the art of air-drying prosciutto reached new heights after a Doge taster noticed cured hams resisted spoilage and poison absorption better than fresh cuts. Even cheese-making evolved. Aged Parmigiano's hard rind wasn't just for flavor, but because impervious wheels were harder to inject with toxins than soft cheeses. The iconic wax seals on Gouda, originally pressed with noble crests to prove no one had breached the surface. Then there was the fork's awkward journey to European tables. When Byzantine Princess Theodora Daukaina brought hers to Venice in the 11th century, clergy denounced the utensil as devil's prongs, but as poisoning fears grew, practicality outweighed piety. Nobles realized spearing meat with a personal fork avoided contact with communal knives, a common poison vector. By the Renaissance, intricate fork designs flourished, some with hollow handles containing poison-detecting materials like shavings of unicorn horn, usually narwhal tusk. What began as paranoid cutlery became the foundation of modern dining etiquette. The most ingenious innovations emerged from psychological warfare. Suspicion of dyed foods led to natural presentation trends. Think translucent jellies showcasing untainted ingredients, or whole roasted beasts served with identifiable heads still attached. A peacock presented with gilded feathers wasn't just opulent. Its undisturbed plumage proved no toxic basting had been brushed on. Even the rise of chilled desserts traces back to poison-aware cooks who noticed ice crystals formed differently in tampered creams versus pure ones. These advances rippled far beyond castle walls. The guild system's strict ingredient standards, born from nobles demanding accountability, became the blueprint for food safety laws. Apothecaries' poison ledgers evolved into early restaurant menus, listing components to reassure skittish patrons, and that theatrical moment when a waiter grates fresh nutmeg tableside. A holdover from the days when spices were prepared in view to disprove substitutions with toxic lookalikes. Perhaps no invention captures this duality better than the Venetian taster's goblet, a glass with two compartments. The outer cup held wine for the host, while the inner chamber, filled simultaneously through a hidden channel, contained the servant's portion. If the taster drank safely, the lord could toast with confidence. This delicate dance between trust and terror didn't just shape utensils or recipes, it rewired civilization's relationship with food itself, turning every meal into a negotiation between pleasure and paranoia that still lingers in our dining rituals today. Poison masters operated in a world where secrecy meant survival, and their coded language was as lethal as the toxins they crafted. Hidden within the pages of innocent-looking herbals, their symbols whispered deadly secrets. A delicate flower sketched beside a root might indicate its safe medicinal dose, while the same flower inked with a barely perceptible cross could mark it as fatal. These weren't arbitrary scribbles, they were precise formulas disguised as botanical illustrations, designed to mislead prying eyes while guiding initiates through the alchemy of death. One surviving manuscript from 15th century Bologna shows a seemingly benign recipe for lady's tonic, its margins dotted with tiny black dots that modern chemists realized corresponded to drops of belladonna extract, enough to silence a grown man in minutes. The apprenticeship system was a fortress of silence. New recruits underwent rituals straight from a spy's handbook, blood oaths sworn on vials of their own antidotes, coded handshakes to identify allies, even staged accidents to test loyalty. A Venetian poison master's diary describes making novices prepare harmless meals laced with placebo powders, then convincing them they'd murdered a stray dog, a brutal lesson in the power of suggestion. Those who progressed learned the art of blind recipes, where ingredients were referred to by colors or celestial bodies. A directive to mix the red dragon's tear with Saturn's shadow might mean dissolving cinnabar in lead acetate, a combination that could mimic natural fever while leaving no unusual traces. Their greatest trick was hiding in plain sight. Poison masters often doubled as respected physicians or monks, using their legitimate work as camouflage. A monastery's medicinal garden became the perfect front for growing deadly nightshade among the sage, while a physician's casebook might record real patient symptoms alongside notes like "the third hour wanes," code for when to administer a lethal dose. The infamous Black Abbot of Cluny allegedly kept his poison ledger disguised as a psalter, with psalm numbers corresponding to toxin quantities and saints' names standing for targets. When authorities grew suspicious, these masters of deception could simply burn a single incriminating page rather than an entire ledger, leaving the rest looking like pious scribbles. Decoding these systems today is like unraveling a murder mystery written in smoke. Historians at the University of Padua recently discovered that some poison masters used musical notation as cipher keys. The placement of a note on a staff might indicate which jar in an apothecary's shelf contained the real poison, while the others held harmless substitutes. Other clues emerge from oddities in household accounts. Why did a certain countess pay her gardener triple wages every May? Cross-referencing with her enemy's death dates reveals the payments coincided with the brief annual flowering of water hemlock in his plots. The true brilliance of these codes lay in their fluidity. A symbol meaning safe in Florence might signify double the dose in Paris, forcing apprentices to relearn the lexicon with each new master. Some employed mirror writing that only made sense when held to candlelight, while others devised recipes where every third word was a decoy. The most chilling example comes from a Saxon manuscript where the real formula appears in the gaps between lines, written in invisible ink made from gallnut extract. It darkens only when brushed with vinegar, a substance no one would casually spill on precious parchment. What emerges from these fragments is a portrait of obsessive control over knowledge. Poison masters understood that their power came not from the toxins themselves, but from being the only ones who could wield them precisely. When the French king's investigators raided a suspected poisoner's workshop in 1489, they found shelves of identical vials labeled solely with quilted patterns, a tactile code the master could read by touch in the dark, ensuring even if captured, he couldn't be forced to reveal which vial held the antidote. This wasn't just tradecraft, it was a declaration that in a world where recipes were more valuable than gold, the right to decide who lived or died would never be left to chance. Even in an age where power often flowed from the edge of a sword, poisoning carried a unique stigma, a moral stain that split medieval society down the middle. Knights who would proudly run enemies through on the battlefield recoiled at the thought of a tainted chalice, considering it a violation of some unspoken code. Chivalric texts like the Book of the Order of Chivalry condemned poison as the weapon of serpents, not men, while troubadours spun tales of assassins dying haunted deaths, their own toxins turning against them. Yet behind closed doors, pragmatists argued that poison was simply efficiency. Why waste an army when a single spiced fig could achieve the same end? This wasn't just philosophical bickering, it was a debate about the very soul of power. The Church's stance added fuel to the fire. While Scripture never explicitly forbade poisoning, theologians like Thomas Aquinas labeled it a sin against natural law, a corruption of God's design where food should nourish, not destroy. In 1284, the Archbishop of Mainz even declared that poisoning victims couldn't receive last rites unless they'd vomited the toxin, believing the act itself defiled the soul. Yet hypocrisy lurked beneath the sermons. When Pope Alexander VI's enemies began dying after lavish Vatican banquets, few clergy dared question whether the Holy Father's cooks had heavenly help. Legal codes reflected this schism with brutal clarity. Saxon law demanded poisoners be boiled alive in their own brews, while Venetian courts devised the pona della botte, strapping convicts into barrels filled with vipers. But punishments often revealed more about power than morality. A noble caught poisoning a rival might lose a hand, while a servant accused of tainting their master's soup faced being roasted over the kitchen fire they'd once tended. The inconsistency spoke volumes. What made poison monstrous wasn't the death, but who held the vial. Philosophers offered no easy answers. Some, like Ramon Llull, argued poisoning was uniquely evil because it exploited trust, turning the sacred act of breaking bread into betrayal. Others, like the shadowy alchemist known as Magister Salinus, wrote treatises justifying necessary poisonings to depose tyrants, framing it as civic duty. His Liber Beneficiae even included recipes labeled for the greater good, like a slow-acting mercury compound designed to make despots too addled to rule. These debates mirrored the era's larger tensions. Was morality defined by actions or outcomes? A cook who poisoned a cruel lord to save starving peasants might be hailed as a saint or demon, depending on who told the tale. The ethical lines blurred further when gender entered the equation. Female poisoners were alternately vilified as monstrous or romanticized as desperate heroines. When the Contessa de Langosco poisoned her abusive husband with monkshood-laced wine in 1412, the local peasantry smuggled flowers to her cell, while the nobility demanded her execution. Chroniclers couldn't even agree what to call her: a black widow or angel of deliverance. Meanwhile, male poisoners like Cesare Borgia faced less moral outrage than tactical admiration. His Cantarella powder was discussed in courtly circles with the same detached interest as new siege engines. What haunted medieval thinkers most was poison's invisibility. Unlike a sword stroke or arrow wound, it left no visible mark on the body, just a quiet collapse that could be blamed on bad humors or divine wrath. This ambiguity made it the perfect weapon for an age obsessed with appearances, where rulers needed to maintain illusions of stability even as they eliminated threats. The real scandal wasn't that poisoning happened, but that it forced society to confront the lies it told itself about power, justice, and the price of survival. When a Florentine diplomat wrote that the safest poison leaves no trace in history, only in graves, He wasn't just describing a method, he was acknowledging the uncomfortable truth that some questions of ethics dissolve in wine, unanswered even as the cup empties. Festive feasts transformed dining halls into stages for the ultimate test of trust, where every bite was a gamble wrapped in celebration. Take the legendary wedding banquet of Isabella d'Este in 1490, where the groom's family presented a towering sugar sculpture of the couple, only for the bride's personal cook to insist on breaking off a piece and eating it first. This wasn't mere politeness, it was a calculated move to prove the sugary center hadn't been injected with hemlock syrup. The applause that followed wasn't just for the craftsmanship, it was relief disguised as admiration. Peacock pies served with reassembled feathers weren't just culinary flexes, they were edible security systems. The intricate reassembly process meant any slit in the crust for poison insertion would be obvious, while the bird's hollowed body created a natural evidence locker. If the meat spoiled or showed odd discoloration, foul play was assumed. At the 1486 Feast of the Pheasant, Duke Philip the Good's kitchen staff took this further by sewing live songbirds into the pastry crusts. When the pies were cut open and birds flew out, the spectacle wasn't just entertainment, it demonstrated no toxic gases had been trapped inside during baking. Wedding feasts became particularly high-stakes theaters of suspicion. Venetian bridal banquets often featured mirror service, where identical dishes were prepared simultaneously in locked adjacent kitchens, with one randomly selected for serving. The Florentine custom of the bride's plate, a special ceramic dish only the bride would eat from, kept under guard from kitchen to table, wasn't romantic tradition, but a poison prevention measure. Records from the Sforza court show bridesmaids were sometimes covertly assigned to monitor the groom's relatives during meals, watching for anyone who conspicuously avoided certain dishes. The infamous Borgia banquets elevated this tension to art form. Lucrezia Borgia's wedding feast featured an entire course of anti-venom dishes, artichokes stewed with crushed emeralds believed to neutralize toxins, wines aged with unicorn horn shavings, even bread baked with terra sigillata clay tablets that supposedly sweat in the presence of poison. The irony, these very precautions became psychological weapons. When Cardinal Orsini suddenly declined the protected dishes, his panic betrayed guilty knowledge. He was executed weeks later for plotting against the family. Seasonal celebrations carried their own dangers. Christmas feasts posed unique risks as traditional spices like nutmeg and cloves could mask bitter toxins, while summer fruit platters offered perfect hiding spots for injected poisons. A French duke's household accounts reveal payments for festive tasters, extra staff hired during holidays specifically to sample each variety of grape or berry on platters arranged in checkerboard patterns, creating a living grid of accountability. The ultimate display of culinary loyalty came in the form of sacrificial dishes. When Holy Roman Emperor Charles V visited Naples in 1536, his head cook prepared two identical pheasant pies, one randomly selected for serving, the other left sealed in the kitchen with the cook's teenage son sitting beside it. The unspoken message was clear: any poison meant for the emperor would also kill the cook's heir. This brutal calculus forced rulers to recognize their dependence on these kitchen artists, not just as servants, but as guardians willing to stake their families' lives on every recipe. Behind the gilded veneer of these festivities, an elaborate dance of deception unfolded. Wine stewards developed the habit of pouring from height, not for aeration, but to prove no powdery residue clung to the bottle's neck. Servants circling with finger bowls weren't just offering convenience, the rosewater's strong scent helped detect telltale chemical odors on guests' hands. Even the tradition of 12th night cake concealed a defensive strategy. The bean determining the king of the feast ensured one guest would voluntarily sample every dish first, unknowingly playing the role of royal taster. What made these celebrations so dangerous was their very extravagance. The dozens of courses, the army of temporary kitchen staff, the parade of gifts from suspicious admirers, all created vulnerabilities poison masters exploited. A surviving letter from a Milanese chef warns his apprentice, "The grander the feast, the simpler your dishes must be." His solution, serving plain roast meats on spits that kept turning in full view, and bread baked in individual portions small enough that tampering would require impossibly precise timing. These festive battlegrounds left an unexpected legacy in our modern holiday traditions. The Christmas pudding's dense, uniform texture originated as a poison deterrent. Its sticky mass made injecting liquids impossible. The German custom of the first toast, where the host drinks before guests, a relic of when lords proved their own wine safe. Even the wedding cake's towering layers served practical purpose. Their height required structural supports that also made surreptitious slicing difficult. Every time we clink glasses or watch a chef carve the roast, we're replaying rituals born from an era when celebration and survival were two sides of the same silver platter. Animals became silent sentinels in the deadly game between cooks and poisoners, their instincts harnessed as living laboratories long before chemical tests existed. Picture a medieval banquet where a lord casually tosses scraps to his favorite hound before touching his own plate. This wasn't affection, but a calculated risk assessment. Dogs, with their keen sense of smell and rapid metabolism, were ideal first responders. A whine or sudden lethargy after licking a sauce could send an entire course back to the kitchens. The Venetian archives record a particularly astute mastiff named Bruto who saved his master's life 3 times, detecting arsenic-laced lamb so subtle even the royal taster missed it. His reward, a jeweled collar and a portrait in the family gallery, rare honors for a common beast. Birds fluttered at the heart of this grim science, their delicate constitutions making them early warning systems. Wealthy households kept cages of sparrows or finches near dining tables, offering them morsels from each dish. The Florentine merchant Marco Prentis Chinese letter describes a macabre scene where a single bite of partridge caused a songbird to drop mid-chirp, its wings seizing, a spectacle that spared 12 nobles from sharing its fate. Some lords took this further, employing trained falcons not for hunting, but for their eerie ability to refuse food touched by certain herbs. A surviving training manual from Burgundy details how handlers taught hawks to peck at tainted meat but ignore clean samples, turning them into feathered poison detectives. Insects, too, were drafted into service. Beekeepers noticed their colonies collapsing after harvesting nectar from toxic plants, leading observant cooks to place honeybees near suspect dishes. A curious case from 1412 involves a French count who averted assassination when ants meticulously avoided a spilled drop of his wine, a clue that led to the discovery of crushed yew berries in the cask. Even lowly slugs had their moment. Their slimy trails turned erratic when crossing poison-laced surfaces, a phenomenon documented in a monk's marginalia as Satan's stumble. But no creature was as paradoxical as the medieval poison cat, a specialized role blending pampering and peril. Unlike dogs, cats rarely ate offered food, but their grooming habits made them unwitting test subjects. Lords would stroke felines with their fingers after handling suspicious objects, knowing the cat's subsequent tongue baths would reveal residues. The archives of Milan's Visconti family boast of a silver-pawed Persian named Belladonna, ironically, after the deadly nightshade who could detect 7 toxins simply by refusing to clean her fur after contact. Her sensitivity was so prized that rival courts offered stud fees for her kittens, a feline dynasty of detoxifiers. This reliance on animals exposes the era's brutal pragmatism. Peasants whispered of the dog's share at noble tables, a euphemism for the scraps that might carry death. Falconers carried antidotes alongside their gauntlets, while beekeepers became unexpected advisors on royal safety councils. Yet beneath the utilitarian surface lay a strange kinship. Many of these animal guardians were named in wills, buried in family plots, or immortalized in tapestries alongside their human counterparts. Their role was more than biological, it was symbolic, a living reminder that in a world where trust dissolved like sugar in wine, sometimes salvation wore fur or feathers. The surviving portrait of Duke Federico da Montefeltro shows him not with his sword or scepter, but cradling his aging poison-sniffing spaniel, its graying muzzle resting on a platter, a testament to the unspoken bond between those who ruled and the creatures who helped them survive to rule another day. Legends whisper of a Byzantine cook who could identify poisoned wine by the way it swirled in the cup, or a Hungarian poison master whose mere touch could curdle milk. These tales stretch the bounds of belief, yet buried beneath their fantastical layers lies something far more fascinating: the raw terror and ingenuity of an era where every meal was a potential death sentence. Take the widespread myth of the unfailing palate, a legendary cook said to detect toxins by letting a single drop of sauce linger on his tongue. While no human could truly distinguish arsenic from almond extract by taste alone, the story mirrors real practices like the Venetian chain of sips, where servants passed tiny tasting cups down a line, watching for any reaction before the wine reached their lord's lips. The infamous death glance attributed to poison masters likely stems from their mastery of psychological warfare. A 15th century French chronicle describes a physician who terrified rivals by staring intently at their goblets during feasts, a tactic so effective that victims reportedly collapsed from panic before a single drop was consumed. This chilling reputation wasn't supernatural, it was carefully cultivated. Poison masters knew fear could mimic symptoms, and a well-timed frown might send enemies scrambling for antidotes they didn't need. Folktales also preserve lost techniques. The Slavic legend of Marushka, the cook who saved a king by floating a silver needle in his broth, sounds like fantasy, until you realize medieval cooks routinely used metal oxidation to detect sulfur-based poisons. Similarly, the Arabian Nights tale of a vizier's daughter who wove antidote herbs into bread dough aligns with real Byzantine kitchen practices of kneading activated charcoal into royal loaves. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were oral textbooks encoding survival knowledge in memorable metaphors. Even the most outlandish myths hold fragments of truth. The Welsh legend of the breath taster, a servant who could smell poison in a lord's exhale, seems impossible until you consider that garlic-heavy diets were sometimes prescribed to mask the telltale odor of arsenic on the breath. And the recurring motif of poisoned apples in fairy tales, a direct nod to the medieval practice of injecting toxins into fruit through the stem, leaving the skin unbroken. What makes these stories endure isn't their factual accuracy, but the emotional truths they capture. The German fable of the silent kitchen ghost, a murdered cook who rattles pans to warn of poisoned meals, reflects the very real paranoia that haunted staff after high-profile assassinations. The Italian folktale where a dog's refusal to eat reveals a traitor echoes the actual canines employed as living poison detectors in Venetian palaces. These narratives distilled generations of collective anxiety into forms simple enough for a child to understand and remember. The darkest legends often conceal historical atrocities. The Bohemian Feast of the Burning Tongues, where guests allegedly burst into flames after eating tainted delicacies, likely originated from an actual ergot fungus poisoning that caused hallucinations of heat and spontaneous combustion. Similarly, the Provençal story of a minstrel whose lyre strings snapped when near poison preserved a real practice. Gut strings were sensitive to airborne toxins, making them primitive environmental sensors. By peeling back the layers of exaggeration, we uncover a world where cooks and poison masters didn't just battle with ingredients, they weaponized storytelling itself. A poison master's reputation could be more lethal than their vials, just as a cook's legendary vigilance might deter assassins better than any taster. In the end, these myths remind us that the rivalry wasn't fought solely in kitchens or shadowy workshops, but in the fertile ground of human imagination where the line between a clever trick and dark magic was as thin as the edge of a knife. The deadly dance between castle cooks and poison masters didn't just spice up medieval banquets, it rewired the very machinery of power. Royal courts, once chaotic hubs of feudal loyalty, morphed into labyrinths of bureaucracy, with food safety becoming a state priority on par with taxation or warfare. Take the French Office of the Royal Mouth, established in 1382, whose inspectors carried silver-tipped staffs to probe every sack of flour entering palace kitchens. Their ledgers recorded not just ingredient origins, but the names of every hand that touched them, from miller to scullion, creating accountability chains that predated modern supply tracking by centuries. Succession laws bore the deepest scars of this paranoia. Primogeniture, the practice of passing crowns to firstborn sons, gained traction partly because protracted rivalries between heirs created too many poisoning opportunities. The Habsburgs took it further, drafting pacta successoria documents that required all royal children to dine together daily, believing mutual vulnerability would deter foul play. Marriage alliances, once sealed with simple oaths, now involved elaborate taster exchanges, where brides brought their own food testers as part of their dowries. A surviving contract from the 15th century Spanish court specifies that Princess Isabella's retinue included 12 tasters of varying ages and humors, a living buffet of biological diversity to thwart specialized toxins. The psychological toll reshaped governance itself. Rulers who survived multiple attempts, like Emperor Ferdinand III, developed what modern historians recognize as proto-totalitarian tendencies, micromanaging household staff, banning unapproved gifts of food, even mandating that courtiers chew each bite 7 times before swallowing. This obsession birthed absurd yet revealing traditions. The Duke of Burgundy's silent suppers, where no one spoke lest coded phrases trigger poisoners, or the Polish crown's requirement that all tasters be twins, a bizarre attempt to standardize biological reactions. Modern security protocols still carry these medieval fingerprints. The concept of compartmentalization in intelligence agencies where no single agent knows the full operation echoes the kitchen practice of dividing meal preparation among isolated teams. Diplomatic immunity traces back to the Venetian custom of assigning foreign envoys personal cooks exempt from local laws. Even the U.S. Secret Service's rule against presidents accepting unvetted food finds its roots in the tragic 1483 case of King Alfonso of Portugal, who died after accepting sweets from a seemingly harmless nun. What began as survival tactics hardened into cultural DNA, the meticulous plating of haute cuisine, a descendant of cooks proving no ingredients were hidden beneath sauces. The sushi chef's theatrical knife work, a ritualized remnant of demonstrating blades hadn't been coated with contact poisons. Every time a flight attendant tastes first-class meals before serving, or a bodyguard scans a room for unattended packages, they're channeling 800 years of institutionalized suspicion. Perhaps the rivalry's most profound legacy was normalizing the idea that power requires constant vigilance. medieval courts didn't just fear poison, they bureaucratized it, turning paranoia into policy. The same ledgers that tracked grain inventories now noted which nobles avoided the rosemary lamb and which physicians lingered too long near the wine cellar. This forensic mindset anticipated modern risk assessment, transforming dining halls into early laboratories of human behavior. The ultimate irony, these measures often failed. For every plot thwarted by a vigilant taster, another succeeded because the system grew too rigid, like the infamous peppered pear assassination of 1499, where a duke's obsession with checking for metallic poisons made him overlook harmless-looking spoiled fruit. The cooks and poison masters didn't just change how rulers ate. They taught the world that no defense is perfect, and that survival sometimes depends on trusting the very people you've trained to distrust. The rivalry between castle cooks and poison masters wasn't just a clash of skills. It was a mirror held up to the very soul of medieval society, reflecting its deepest fears and sharpest contradictions. Picture a world where every loaf of bread could be a test of loyalty, where the same hands that seasoned your stew might one day slip poison into your wine. This wasn't paranoia, it was the daily reality for kings and commoners alike, woven into the fabric of life from coronations to christenings. The bread you broke with a friend might seal an alliance or become your last meal. Consider how this battle seeped into every corner of culture. The lavish feasts of nobility weren't just displays of wealth, but intricate performances of power and precaution. When a duke raised his goblet in toast, the flicker of hesitation before sipping spoke volumes. Had the wine been tested by enough tongues? Were the servants who carried it from cellar to table beyond bribery? Even wedding customs transformed under this shadow. The tradition of the bride and groom sharing a ceremonial sip from the same cup wasn't romance, but a public demonstration that neither had poisoned the other's drink. The echoes of this struggle resonate in our modern world more than we realize. That habit of clinking glasses before drinking, it originated from nobles sloshing wine between cups to prove no selective poisoning had occurred. The meticulous plating of haute cuisine, where every ingredient is visible beneath delicate sauces, descends from cooks proving nothing lurked beneath the surface. Even the concept of food critics has roots in royal tasters whose palates could make or break careers. These aren't just quaint traditions, they're living fossils of an age when dining was diplomacy by other means. What's most striking is how this rivalry birthed innovations we now take for granted. The fork's path to European tables was paved by paranoid nobles seeking to avoid touching poisoned knives. The spice trade exploded partly because potent flavors could mask toxins, and because discerning safe spices became a status symbol. Modern food safety protocols, from expiration dates to tamper-proof packaging, are direct descendants of medieval attempts to outwit poisoners. Even the way we scrutinize menus or hesitate before eating at a suspicious buffet carries faint whispers of ancestral caution. Yet for all its darkness, this conflict also revealed humanity's resilience. Cooks responded to poison not just with vigilance, but with artistry, turning meals into edible fortresses of trust. Poison masters, for their part, drove scientific inquiry forward in their quest for undetectable toxins, inadvertently advancing chemistry and medicine. Their shadow war was a crucible that forged both destruction and progress, reminding us that even humanity's darkest impulses can spark unexpected light. As we set our tables tonight without fearing each bite, let's spare a thought for those who came before, the cooks who turned survival into spectacle, the poison masters who turned suspicion into science. Their legacy isn't just in our plates, but in the very way we navigate a world where trust must still be earned, one meal at a time. If history teaches us anything, it's that every feast, no matter how humble, is a small victory over the chaos they once faced. So raise your next bite in silent tribute to the forgotten guardians and shadowy schemers who shaped the way we dine today.